What's going on, guys? Welcome back to WWE Network and Show, where I, Graham G.S. Matthews, break down all the original content I watch on the WWE Network and on Peacock. And today we're talking the latest episode of Broken Skull Sessions with very special guest, The Godfather, as it dropped yesterday on May 30th, 2021. As always, being hosted by Stone Cold Steve Austin. The Godfather is definitely one of the lesser people he's had on in recent episodes. The last couple of episodes have been bangers. Between the Randy Orton one in March, they had obviously Chris Jericho on for the last one in early April. They've had a lot of big names on recently, though it is cool to kind of get the legends back here on the show. Not to say that Orton and Jericho aren't legends, but before them we had Drew McIntyre and Sasha Banks and Bayley, who were all excellent, don't get me wrong. And it was cool to get the modern talent, the current talent on the show as well, but it's also great to have the legends on the show, people that I'm sure Austin has had on his podcast before, over on Podcast One, but to get the visual aspect of it, to get the deeper, more in-depth conversations and discussions, really make these episodes of Broken Skull Session so enjoyable. So definitely not the best episode I've seen of the show, but The Godfather is just so damn likable. He's a great guy, really positive attitude, had a very interesting career that spanned various characters from the late 80s, early 90s, late 90s, early 2000s, and he covered all of that here. I'm not sure if there was anything that he didn't talk about, that he, skipped over by accident, whatever. I think they covered pretty much everything, and I haven't followed The Godfather's career extensively, so if there was anything they missed, I'm not sure. But this was just a great conversation between two old friends that I found to be very, very enjoyable. So to kind of recap it here, he kind of talks about how currently he's just enjoying life as the Godfather. That really is who he is in reality. I had a chance to actually meet him at WrestleCon 2 years ago over WrestleMania 35 weekend, and he's such a nice guy. I had the chance to have him sign my replica Intercontinental Championship belt. So he's a really cool dude in real life as well. He also talks about how he's involved in the cannabis industry now and how it's really helped him a lot in terms with his health and becoming a more positive person and just becoming more laid back and productive and creative, stuff like that. And because he's more involved with that stuff now, he doesn't drink as often as he used to. And he's going to be 60 this year. Now, I thought he already was 60. I looked up his age while I was watching this episode, and I think he already is 60 or is turning 61 this year, so this might have been filmed a while ago and they're just airing it now, I'm not sure. But either way, he talks about how he goes to bed now around like 8:30 and gets up around like 3 a.m., gets up really, really early to kind of spend his mornings doing social media work before kind of hanging out for the rest of the day and going to the gym and doing stuff like that. So they do a toast to Jack Daniels. They always got to get alcohol involved here on the show, so they do a toast to Jack Daniels, even though he doesn't drink as much now as he used to. They also talk about how you would always have to take a shot and gargle it whenever you would cross paths back in the day with Kurt Hennig, that being Mr. Perfect. And he calls him a great dude. They always had a great friendship. So to kind of go back a bit to kind of discuss his upbringings and how he got involved with wrestling and whatnot, which all of this was news to me because, again, I've never really known too much about The Godfather's career beyond the Godfather character itself and all the other characters that he played. But he talked about how he used to grow up playing basketball. He always wanted to play football in high school, but for whatever reason, it didn't work out. I forgot what the reason was. But he ended up getting a full-ride scholarship for a story that he shared. While he was sharing this story, he explained how it kind of came to be, but he got a full-ride scholarship to college for football. Blew his knee out doing that, started bouncing. While he was in college, majored in business and administration. Didn't finish, though. He got kicked out for fighting. He was a very aggressive dude. That's why he's much more relaxed nowadays, but kind of comparison how he was growing up. But he got kicked out for fighting. He would fight really anyone that kind of came his way. And he talks about how he used to be in a motorcycle club and getting tattooed. Yeah, I think in 85 or 88 or something like that. He got his entire body tattooed. And he made great money as a biker, around like $1,000 to $1,500 a week doing the biking stuff. And he was at while he was bouncing and being at bars and clubs and stuff like that, he actually met Scott Norton during the filming of the movie called Over the Top. And that was how he kind of got introduced to professional wrestling. He trained at the Monster Factory. Jerry Lawler wanted him in Memphis almost immediately. And not only to do that, but to put him over in the middle of the ring and really get this guy over as a big star. He also worked in the USWA, but the trade-off in addition to getting exposure was that he wasn't really paid all that well. And while he was there, Dutch Mantell, otherwise known as Zeb Coulter to some newer fans, he wanted to fire the Godfather. He was like, it's not exactly working out. Jerry Jarrett and Jerry Lawler reassured him, listen, we want to keep you here. We don't want to fire you, so I'm not exactly sure why he has it out for you, but we want to keep you here. He also talks about, before we get to the WWE stuff, but when he was in WWE, he had like a motorcycle patch, like a tattoo or whatever on his chest that he had to get covered up because Vince didn't want it on WWE TV. But he has like tattoos, again, all over his body. He talks about the gang that he was a part of and being in the motorcycle club and everything else, and how they were called the Thugs and how they were all about drinking and whatever. He also talks about survival in Memphis, and again, how you had the exposure, but you weren't really getting paid all that well. And at that point, by Taker and many other people, Steve and other people he interacted with in the business at that point, he was known as the guy who knew topless dancers because he owned his own club. I don't know if he did at that point, but he was still very much involved with the nightlife stuff. So he was known as the guy that you can go to get a topless dancer or whatever, which is hilarious. They share a lot of stories after that. I'm not going to go into great specifics here, but they share stories about, Steve being in a tag team match with him and Dutch against Godfather and Undertaker in Indiana, which would not have been WWE. This would have been pre-WWE. Godfather calls Bill Dundee the Giant Killer, and he recalls a terrible match that he had with Undertaker at one of these shows and how they became very, very good friends after that. And he told Taker that he was too white to not have tattoos, and he was too big to not ride a Harley. So I guess Taker can credit Godfather for all the tattoos he ended up getting, and for the fact he ended up riding a motorcycle and still does to this day, which is pretty funny. He also tells a story about how he and Taker got stuck in a snowstorm. I could have sworn I've heard this story before on one of those story time shows that WWE does on their network and on Peacock. Maybe I'm mistaking that with another one with JBL and the APA and whatever, but I thought that was a funny story. They used to chop each other a lot to the point where they would wake up the next day and their chests would be red because they would chop each other so fucking much because they were so close and they were such good friends. That was what they would do as friends. He talked about how he learned how to listen to a crowd during his time in Japan. He also worked in Germany. Taker went to WWE during that period, and Taker got him a tryout with WWE. Vince wanted to hire him, and Vince told him, listen, you got the body of a monster, but the face of a baby. So we got to fix that. And he gave him the Papa Shango gimmick. He told him, go out and rent the movie Live and Let Die. And Godfather said, I've already seen it. So basically, that's where the character came from, to have his face half painted. And they kind of gave it the whole supernatural voodoo spin on it, which was, I never knew that was where the character came from, which was pretty cool. So he was determined to make this thing work. This was early 90s. It was a gimmick that was way ahead of its time. Not way ahead of its time because they were doing the supernatural bullshit at that point. But he was really committed to making this character work. He went to New Orleans to learn more about voodoo people and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, it was a really hard gimmick to get over. And he even said that it probably would have worked a few years later when they were doing all the dumb character stuff in the mid-90s. But in the early 90s, it just wasn't the right time for it yet. They replayed the stupid Warrior footage during his mini storyline with the Ultimate Warrior where he put a curse on him and made him throw up. I'm not exactly sure why they had to replay that part specifically here on here. Replay that part specifically here on the show, but it was funny. It was from Superstars in 92. He was just going through a rough way at the time. He was not in a great mental space. He was going through a divorce. He said I think he's been married 3 times. And he's been married now, he's on his 3rd wife, but they've been married for 20 years, so I would hope that's it. But I don't think they've divorced. I'm pretty sure they're still together now. He actually, yeah, they are, because he referenced his current wife at the end of the episode and said they've been together for 20 years and how she was the one who kind of helped him orchestrate the Godfather gimmick. But we'll get to that later on. So he talks about how he was going through a divorce at the time. He didn't smoke, so he was a lot meaner. Didn't smoke the cannabis and stuff like that. So he wasn't as laid back. He was way more aggressive and just a much more of an asshole, he said. And, it was actually Taker who encouraged him to just go home. Listen, just go home. You need to get your shit straight before you come back here. And he even admits that Godfather, that is, he didn't grow up a wrestling fan. Wrestling was always his second job. It was either biking or the bouncing or owning his own club. That was really what he was more passionate about than anything else. So he was called back to WWE by Vince. and he was given this comic character that was based off of, again, something I didn't know, the UFC's Chemo. Chemo something, I'm not sure what the last name was there, but they had a fighter named Chemo, and that was when UFC kind of got started. Kama was based off of him. And Kama stood for, again, something I did not know, kick any man's ass, which I thought was interesting. And he wasn't initially sold on the idea until Vince said, we'll let you ride a Harley to the ring. And then Godfather was like, sold, I'm there. And they rewatched his old vignette and what the character was all about. And it seemed like it could have worked. I mean, my only recollection of the Kama character was when he was involved in the $1 Million Corporation faction, his matches with Taker that weren't very good and just not very good matches, really, because he wasn't a great wrestler. He was a great character and a great guy, but not a great wrestler. So he even admits it didn't click. It didn't work. They rewatched the casket match he had with The Undertaker, actually, from SummerSlam 95. Not a great match. He even admitted that he just wasn't having fun anymore, so he left. WCW offered him a deal, and he accepted it initially until Ron Simmons, who he was on good terms with and he was good friends with, told him not to accept it and said, listen, they are not going to be good to you, man. And obviously Ron Simmons knew because he was involved with WCW. And they didn't say that WCW was racist at that point, but he said that, Godfather was used to the way that WWE did things, but listen, dude, they're just not great, and not that they're going to use the N-word or whatever, but he referenced that a lot, and how if someone would use that word on him, he would absolutely go off. He was not going to hold back. He would get fucking pissed and just beat the shit out of this person. Simmons essentially, hinted at them saying that quite a bit in WCW, because this is down south, so it's a completely different story, obviously. And if you're going to do that, you're just going to beat the shit out of everyone there. And Godfather had no problem doing that. But Ron was like, hey, maybe it's best that you don't go there if that's what's going to happen. So you're probably, your best bet is not to go to WCW. So he passed on the deal, and WCW offered Virgil a deal instead for a third of the money that Virgil, I think, took, which is hilarious. So anyway, he was supposed to return as Papa Shango during the Attitude Era with a new look, be way more serious. But Vince called him into his office and said, listen, change of plans, pal. And he put him in the Nation of Domination instead. And he had no issue with it because he kind of looked at it as just a job. Listen, you're my boss. It's your idea. Why combat this? It would have been cool to come back as Papa Shango. I was in the greatest physical shape of my career up to that point. So let's give it a 110%, but they changed plans on him. He gave that 110% as well. And they talk a lot about Nation of Domination and how Ron was so influential in making that work, how great of a guy he was to him and Rock and everyone else involved in that group, and how they were all different, but they came together for a great group, and it just worked. It's still one of the best factions in WWE history all these years later. And Vince even told him at that point, once we turn him and we kind of feed into the booze and whatever, he's going to be a big star. And that group not only served as a launching pad for him, but Farouk as Ron Simmons was doing great stuff with JBL and the APA. D'Lo Brown became a multi-time singles champion in the company. Obviously, Mark Henry, future world champion. The Godfather went on to go to become the Godfather. Soon after. So they all kind of had success coming out of Nation of Domination. And Steve, for some reason, shares his own experience being in a strip club. I don't really know how prevalent that was to this podcast or this interview, but he talks about that for some reason. And then they get into the Bone Street Krew, obviously consisting of Rikishi, Savio Vega, Taker, Godfather, and a few other people. And he shares his story, Godfather does, about how he was listening to, I think, country music or something in the car with Yokozuna one day. And Yokozuna wanted to change it to rap because he was more of a rap guy, and even asked him, do you know that you're black? Which I thought was hilarious. It was just a great story. I mean, I can't do the story justice, but the way that he said it was great. And he just praises Yokozuna and how great of a guy he was, and he and Taker are on the same level for him in terms of how great friends they were with Godfather and how great of people they are and were. He talks about BSK reuniting the night before Survivor Series 2020, and he reassures that because they show a picture of them at the bar, and none of them were wearing masks, and all of these guys are older, so it was definitely concerning if you look at the picture on the surface and realize what the time frame was, and Tim White was there as well. And he reassures people watching this, we were all tested for COVID beforehand. It was a private bar that Vince rented out for us, and we were there the night before and probably the night after. He didn't specify. The night before Taker retired at Survivor Series 2020. They just had a great time. And he saw people that he had not seen in like 20 years. So it was a really, really cool time drinking at the bar with the guys. And then they get to the Godfather character and how it was just an extension of his real life self, and his wife at the time, and even today, they're still together today, helped him out with all the outfits, the chains, the accessories, the jewelry, what he was wearing, all that stuff. And how it kind of stemmed from The Rock in a promo. He was like, oh, D'Lo Brown the Enforcer, and the Godfather, I think is what he said, or whatever his name was at that point. And that's how he started being called the Godfather, because of Rock referring to him as such in a promo. And he really got over on house shows working with John Layfield, JBL, and how they would have like a 10, 12 hard-hitting minute match, or 10 to 12 minute hard-hitting match, and the crowd just wouldn't give a shit until like he brought out the ladies and stuff like that, the hoes as he would call them, and they would kind of play off of that, and they wouldn't do anything at all, but the crowd would eat that shit up. They rewatch his entrance from that point in time and how over it was, and it was never scripted. They always gave him as much time as he needed to do whatever he wanted, really. And he said he had the time of his life doing that character, and it's just a lot easier being yourself, and it's a lot easier to get over doing something that is really you, because people can sense that. He talks about how the music got him over and how it was like a mix of like porn music and fucking Voodoo Child, which was hilarious to hear him talk about that, which is true. That's absolutely what it is. And Vince even asked, he's like, hey, can you start bringing girls to the ring? Or even asked them, I guess, where do you think we can get girls to bring in for your entrance? And Godfather was like, are you serious? Like, I own a fucking club. Like, this is what I do. So he brought in his own women, and it was a great addition to the character. And obviously, it was never going to last. It was not PC, just very degrading to women and stuff like that. But for the time, it worked. It absolutely worked for that time period and got him over huge. So they show a clip of him almost getting Taker to crack and Paul Bearer too on an episode of Heat, and I think in 98, just talking about how Taker could benefit from having one of the hoes and all this other stuff. It was just a great moment. And he talked a little bit more about how, and he referenced this earlier, how he influenced Taker's tattoos. And he told him, listen, you're too white to not have tattoos, and too big to not have a Harley, to not be riding a Harley. So he kind of influenced Taker's lifestyle from that point forward, interestingly enough. He talked about enjoying being tag team champions with Bull Buchanan. He loved working with the APA and Teddy Long, riding with those guys. Come the early 2000s, the PTC, which stood for I don't know if they're probably still around today, the Parents Television Council, came after The Godfather, came after Vince. Obviously not PC at all was this character. It was really more a matter of when than if. And he had a lot of fun doing the character. The character was a lot of fun for a lot of people, but it had a shelf life. I mean, at that point, maybe not, but at some point it was bound to happen, sooner or later. So Vince really went to bat for him. He went to bat for the Goldust character that was also kind of on hot water at that point, who also left the company to go to like TNA and other shit like that. So it just wasn't working, and they put him in the Right to Censor instead. And the whole point of Right to Censor was to parody the Parents Television Council. He said he absolutely hated it. There wasn't one time in the business he hated as much as being in the RTC, because it just wasn't him, and it wasn't any fun at all. So it was more of a work than it was a shoot. Or it was more of a shoot than it was a work for him, because he absolutely hated his career at that point. He came back as the Godfather in early 2002 in the Royal Rumble match. Very well received, but they wanted to make him more of an escort, and they had to tone down the character, and it just wasn't working, so they decided to release him, which he was completely fine with. He wasn't angry about it. He wasn't bitter about it, because he knew that was the right choice to make. And he knew that it was time to go, because the character just wasn't what it used to be. His only real regret, he said, was not putting over his wife and not thanking her during his WWE Hall of Fame 2016 speech, because he had the crowd sing his grandson a happy birthday, I believe, and he totally forgot that right after that he was going to thank his wife for helping him put together the costumes and the outfits and the accessories, jewelry, blah, 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 blah. He didn't realize until he was walking off the stage that he forgot to mention his wife, and he still regrets it to this day, 5 years later, and I guess she still holds it over him, which is funny. But yeah, he still keeps in touch with people from the business all the time. Teddy Long, Taker, everyone really in between. He said even BSK has their own Facebook chat, which is so 2021. Could you imagine Taker being on fucking Facebook chatting these people back and forth? Godfather and Rikishi, like that's just hilarious to me. But anyway, he talks about what's next for him, what's going on now, whatever. He enjoys being in the cannabis industry, how it's really helped him, and he wants to show other people that it can be beneficial for the right reasons and whatever. And it may not be for Steve, it may not be for you and me, but it could, it's really worked well for him, and he praises cannabis in that way. And he said that Carano called him back in early 2016 to ask him about going to WrestleMania weekend. Are you going to be there? He said, yeah. Who are you bringing? And he said his wife. Why? He said, well, you're going to want to bring your whole family because Vince wants to induct you into the Hall of Fame. And he even realizes he's not in the Hall of Fame for his wrestling work, which is accurate. He's in there because he was a great character, which he was. And I know there was skepticism from me and other people like, why is he going into the Hall of Fame? But, he is a real big part of WWE history. He's an awesome dude, deserving for that reason alone of the honor, if nothing else. And he says that in a nutshell, after Steve asks him about how he can sum up his entire wrestling career, he said pro wrestling was a great experience for him. He met lifelong friends out of it, and he was honored and privileged to be a part of it. And that was the end of the interview, so I thought this was really, really very enjoyable. I learned a lot of stuff I didn't know before. I'm sure all of it at this point is public knowledge. I'm sure there weren't many, breaking stories, like, earth-shattering stories that people haven't heard before. The timing was not great because this dropped yesterday. I finished watching it today. The timing wasn't great because all the focus was on the AEW Double or Nothing pay-per-view, which was fantastic, by the way. It was a great show. But this dropped earlier on in the day. It's Memorial Day, so maybe that's why they did it, as opposed to like a bigger episode like the Jericho interview. I'm not sure why they couldn't have just dropped it last week when there was no pay-per-view on and there just wasn't anything going on. So I'm not sure why they couldn't have done it last week, but whatever. It was very enjoyable. It clocks in at around an hour and 28 minutes, so it's like an hour and a half. It flies by. They tell a lot of great stories. He and Steve have great chemistry. And the Godfather, like I said, just seems like a great dude. Had the chance to meet him 2 years ago, like I said earlier. And he was just a really, really nice guy. So to see him on Broken Skull Sessions, I thought was cool. And it was a nice break from having all the other current talent on, from the Ortons and Jerichos to the Baileys and Sashas and Drews and people like that. It was cool to have on another legend. And he's already had on a few legends that have since left for AEW, actually. Big Show, Mark Henry. So maybe the Godfather's next, who knows. But yeah, they make this a monthly thing, which they have. I think that the Orton interview dropped in March. The Jericho one dropped in April. This one dropped in May. February might have been Bailey. I don't remember. Sasha might have been January. I know Drew was December. And then November was Taker. So they've done one kind of once a month for a while now, and they've always been great. So if they can drop another one in June, I know it's a little late now because it's May 31st as I speak now. It might be a little too close. That would be wonderful. But this was a really good interview and a really good podcast and a very good episode of Broken Skull Sessions I would implore you to check out. And thank you guys for checking out these reviews. I appreciate it. Be sure to check out more Broken Skull Sessions reviews in the description box down below. Be sure to like the video, drop a comment, share the video, and subscribe to the channel for more daily content. Hit the bell button as well to be notified every time a new video goes up. And be sure to check out my exclusive interview from earlier today with WWE superstar Shayna Baszler, talking about intergender wrestling, her match with Reginald on Raw, Marvel movies, future opponents, really everything, being back in front of fans at WrestleMania this year. Really fun interview with the Queen of Spades up right now here on the channel in audio form from earlier today. Have a great one, guys. Happy Memorial Day. Enjoy the rest of your week. I'm Graham G.S. Matthews, and I'll catch your ass down the road.